we've talked about living soil, we've talked about soil types and how best you can set your garden up for success. Now let's talk about the plants, the most important part, right? That's what everybody sees, that's what you want to grow. And this in the fall and winter is a great time to start planning that out. If you want to take a look at what seeds you currently have, what you did last year, what was successful, what worked in your garden, where did you go wrong? Did you have things that were maybe in the sun that should have been in the shade more? Did you have stuff that was in the shade that should have been in the sun more because you got a lower yield of the harvest from them? And knowing, then taking time this time of year to know what you should put where and making that plan. Get a notebook and draw it out and plan out what you had and write down notes that you learned from this last year so that you can apply them for your garden next year. Looking at seeds versus starts. So starts are when you get those plants from the garden centers that are just a little bitty baby that you're gonna put into your garden. I've had a few first-time gardeners that got starts and then they put them way too close together, and by the end of the season, I feel like the plants are dying because they're too close together, and it looks bare in the beginning because there's so much space between the plants. But if you follow the guidelines that are on the starts or on the seeds, you can't go wrong because they know how big those plants are supposed to grow, and then you can plant appropriately so that by 6 weeks later your garden's not overflowing and exploding and the plants are dying because there's too many plants in a little tiny spot. You can go a little bit shorter than some of those guidelines depending on the plant. Sometimes that doesn't work, sometimes it does, so definitely play around with it. Write down those notes so you can learn what works and what doesn't work in your own space. Because I can tell you what are general ideas, but I can also tell you that in my backyard it's very shady, and what works there isn't going to work in my front yard because my front yard is very sunny. And if I have those differences in my own yard, you have 10,000 differences from what I'm telling you. So I'm giving you general tips, but if you have anything specific, drop us a message, drop us a comment, and let us know what your specific problems are. We can help you out, our community can help you out, and there's so many gardeners that are willing to share their own tips and tricks, and I want to help you guys grow easier too. So seeds versus starts. Seeds are great. They're cheaper to get. You get a ton of seeds in a little tiny packet, but not all of those seeds will germinate, and then you also have to build them up so that they're hardy enough to go outside. Sometimes you can cold sow seeds, which is when you take those seeds and you put them in your garden when it's still cold outside, which works for seeds that are kind of those early spring ones. Carrots like it cold, lettuce, kale, anything like that. Garlic also likes it cold. And so you can plant those earlier in the spring. You can cold sow them as long as you do it early enough. So in my area, I'm in Kansas City. It's pretty dang cold here. In January, we sometimes get down to under -10, but a lot of times we're still in the 0 to 30s all the way through the end of February. But you can cold sow here and say mid to late February, and then those crops will be ready by March into April. Those colder weather crops. Now we might still get a frost in April, so we are not planting anything that isn't frost tolerant until after last frost date, which says it's April 15th, but as we all know, that's a moving target. So with seeds, you can cold sow them outside, but most people we're gonna start them inside. And some inside gives them a great starting point. You know how plants you have, you know coming up, you can kind of environment a little bit more. So you get those seed trays. It's really great to bottom water those seed trays. I've lost so many seedlings by just watering them too much, and the water crushes their stems if they're still too baby. And bottom watering eliminates that factor, helps keep them moist because seeds need to stay wet in that first time, but as they start to sprout up and get their second set of leaves, then you can kind of on the watering and give them a little more time to dry out so they don't get root rot, which is my second most common way of killing a seed is by giving it root rot because you're overwatering it, and so there's a little bit of a balance there. And the other thing, the third tip I have for you for seedlings is as they get to that second, third, fourth set of leaves, if you turn a fan on them that blows gently across them, it kind of simulates and it will help them build up tolerance to wind, which is another way to kill them when they go outside. But when you give them a perfect environment, they don't actually grow as strong as they can if they have a little bit of challenges. And so that wind gives them a little bit of challenges where they can grow stronger. And when they grow stronger, then they're easier to put outside. So seedlings, when you start them from seed, not everything will germinate. One of the ways you can increase your germination rates is if you soak your seedling mix or your seed tray in water that has 1/4 ounce of plant juice per gallon, because our microbes in our plant juice actually help boost your seed germination rates. And we've seen professionals go from 85% seed rates to 99% germination rates. So if you can imagine a professional having that kind of benefits, you're going to see it too in your own home. And indoors also need those grow lights. So you've seen some have small lights. If you've got a small grow tray, you can have racks where you've got a long strip of grow lights up above. There's all sorts of different setups. I even have one that's just a bulb that I put in a light that just shines onto my seedlings. Seedlings want the light closer as they're little, and you move it up as you go because you're kind of simulating the sun. And grow lights aren't as strong as the sun, and if they're too far away, it's going to make those seedlings stretch. And so when they stretch, they get weaker spots in their stem, and is where they have more space between sets of leaves. And so ideally you want them pretty short as they're growing hardier, and so that's where you have the light lower so it doesn't have to stretch and reach towards the light. That is not one of the challenges that actually grows stronger seedlings. So you want them the light lower and just kind of as you go if you can. And you can't, just do your best. No one's perfect. No one doesn't. And if you've got kind of stretchy seedlings, maybe when you go to plant them outside, you plant them a little deeper so that the soil protects that stem a little bit more. So when wind comes outside, it doesn't like knock it over and break it up. And my other big tip, if you're growing is you need to harden them up to go outside. So in your perfect environment in your house is a flat temperature usually, maybe a little colder, a little warmer, but when it goes outside, it's gonna have large temperature swings. Here in Kansas, we can have 20 to 40 degree swings, depending on what week and what Mother Nature feels like that day. And you want your seedlings to get a little bit used to colder weather at night and warmer weather during the day, or whatever else is going on outside. So as you're getting ready to plant them outside, you want to set them outside for like a day, 2 hours a day the next day, and maybe 3 hours the next week, and trying to build a time that they're spending outdoors so they can get used to that sunlight, get used to the wind, get used to the temperature changes that's happening until it's sat out there 8 hours plus, and finally leave them out there a full day and plant them in the ground. And it'll make you have some very strong seedlings. But a lot of people like to start seedlings, and depending on where you are, you might be able to start them as early as December, even November if you've got a good planting season in January, February. Some of the places I've lived in the past, you have a really great chance to plant outdoors in February, and so having those seedlings started in December or January means you can plant them outdoors in February, early March, depending on where you are. But you don't want to start them too early. So where I am with the frost date of April 15th, I'm not going to want to start my tomatoes that early. I'm going to want to start my tomatoes more in like February, March, because they're not cold tolerant. They're not going to want to deal with our February or April colder weather sometimes. And sometimes we'll have a frost date that's even into May. And so my tomatoes by seeds in late February, early March means I can go ahead and plant those in the ground in May and do some harvesting in June. And starting by seed means I can control when I want to plant them, when I want these things to be ready, when I want my harvest date. So you can back out all those calculations and see when the best time is for your area, when your frost dates are, when you want to actually plant these things. And then you can plan ahead, because just because you plant in the spring doesn't mean you can't plant later on. So things like lettuce and carrots, garlic, sometimes you pull those up and you get rid of the plants. Well, now you've got a gap in your garden, and guess what? You can actually plant again. And you don't have to plant the same thing. So sometimes we'll do cold weather crops like carrots and lettuce, and then replant later with like strawberries and going into summer, and then When those are done, plant again with carrots and lettuce as we get to the colder months again, so you can have kind of that rotation of crops and see how that's getting you a full harvest, a full year's worth, and you can kind of maximize of your garden, which is really cool. Now, if you're starting from seedlings, which is a little bit easier, so if you're a beginner, seedlings are a great place to start. I know I tend to like certain things from seedlings and certain things from seeds, and you can start from any garden center, any local place, or even the big box stores, if that's all you've got in your area. We do have to be cautious of what are they feeding their plants. So I've heard of a lot of people who have bought milkweed from certain places. It turns out that sometimes those places will feed systemic pesticides to their milkweed and all their other plants. And what systemic pesticides do is they go up inside the stem and the leaves of the plants, and they're inside the plant. And now you can't remove it, and it's there for the life cycle of that plant. And if you're buying milkweed, you're doing it because you like butterflies and monarch butterflies in particular. And with a systemic pesticide, now it's in there long term, and come July and the monarchs are having their babies, and caterpillars are on your leaves and eating them, they start to die because they're eating the pesticide that was put in the plant back in the beginning from the garden center. So you be really careful what you're buying, where you're buying it from. Ask those questions to your garden center. What are you feeding your plants? And what are you using to kill bugs in your greenhouses that you're growing these plants in? And I guarantee they'll know. Some box stores not, because they're buying it from someone else, but a lot of local garden centers, they're growing them themselves. They know where it's coming from. They know all the little details to it. It starts such an easy way to get started. You can buy quite for just a little bit, but they're already started, and so you know how many plants you're planting, and you just have to take care of them and make sure that they don't die. So it's a little bit of risk as you transplant them into your garden. But if you keep watering them, make sure that you're kind of keeping an eye on them, you can get started pretty easily with starts. And so I recommend those for beginner gardeners, and then for the flexibility, because you can only get starts at certain times of year. You can only get specific starts from the garden centers. So if you want to grow heirloom tomatoes, or a special type of potato, or a cellar of watermelon, you might not be able to get a start from your garden center, and so you might have to grow those from seeds. So seeds give you a lot more flexibility. You just have to be cautious of where you're buying them from, so you get quality seeds. And then also have to be cautious buying starts, and see what your garden centers are feeding your starts before you buy them.